Howdy folks, welcome to beautiful Buxton. My name's Will and this is the 2022 Scott Spark. Now I've been riding this bike on home trails for the past couple of weeks, but we decided to bring it here as part of the Ride High Country test sessions to put the Spark to the test on the sublime single track of the Buxton Mountain Bike Park. So join us for the next few days of riding as we review the new Scott Spark.
Welcome to Buxton! Woohoo! Wow! Yeah!
Now the Spark is Scott's lightweight full suspension XC race bike, and this is brand new for 2022. It has been totally overhauled with this futuristic frame design which hides the rear shock inside the frame. It also gets an increase in rear travel from 100mm to 120mm. We've got some very progressive XC geometry and updates to the TwinLoc system. As with the previous Spark, Scott has very cleverly developed two bikes in one. Now both platforms share essentially the same frame and 120mm of rear wheel travel, but the Spark RC, which is the race bike, gets a 120mm travel fork, fast rolling tyres and a lightweight build kit. Then there's the Spark 900, which is the trail version. That gets a slightly longer 130mm travel fork, a higher volume rear shock and chunkier tyres. The bike that we've been testing here is the Scott Spark 910, which is one step down from the top of the range. Retail price on this is $7,699 Australian dollars. For your money, you're getting that carbon frame, a Fox 34 fork, the Fox Nude 5T shock, a transfer dropper post, Shimano XT group set, Syncross wheels and finishing kit, and 2.4-inch wide Schwalbe Wicked Wheel tyres. Now confirmed weight for our test bike here, weighed without pedals and with the tyre setup tubeless, is just 12.43 kilos. So I'm here with my friend Chris from Beechworth and we are both frothing on the trails here at the Buxton Mountain Bike Park. Lush green ferns, clay-based hard packs, fast berms, lots of flowy single track. There's a bit of everything here. There's about 23 kilometres of purpose-built single track, everything from green kiddie-friendly trails all the way through to Black Diamond jump trail.
The cathedral. Look out.
But for the most part, it's all quite fast and flowy. You can come here on XC hardtail. Yeah. I think a short travel trail bike like the Scott Spark is ideal, which is why we brought it here to test it. The beauty about the Buxton Mountain Bike Park though is it's only about a 10-minute drive from Marysville, and of course you're at the foot of Lake Mountain and the Cascade Trail. The Cascade Trail runs from the top of Lake Mountain all the way down to Marysville, and the beauty about these two locations being right next door to each other, you can make a long weekend of it and you can spend some riding here at Buxton and riding at Lake Mountain as well. So first we have to talk about the most obvious feature on this bike, which is the fact that the rear shock is actually now inside the frame. The position of the rear shock is not dissimilar to the old Spark, but it sits a little bit lower down. Scott says this helps to lower the centre of mass on the new Spark. It's driven by these two link arms here which connect to the carbon seat stay. Now, these join together by a splined axle, and inside the frame they then connect to a third link arm which drives the rear shock as the suspension goes through its travel. Now, why would you put a rear shock inside the frame? Well, for a start, it looks fantastic. It gives this bike a very distinct silhouette, and it also means that Scott can now build the Spark with compatibility for 2 water bottles, which is becoming an increasingly popular feature on full suspension XC bikes. The other advantage of putting the shock inside the frame is it keeps it away from all of the elements. So every time you wash your bike and you use degreasers, you are stripping away oil and drying out seals on the suspension. So putting it inside the frame keeps it away from water, from degreasers, from mud, dirt, dust, all that kind of thing. So in theory, it should last longer in between servicing. The downsides of putting it inside the frame? Well, it is harder to access. Scott says it's relatively easy to remove from the frame. We'll be testing that shortly to see just how easy it is to drop the shock out of the frame when it comes time to servicing. It's still quite easy to access the parts that you need to, so there's a hatch on the underside of the down tube. Open that up and you get access to the shock's air valve and also the rebound damping along with the shock lockout attachment point. Hey! Also on the outside of the link arm here, you have a little sag indicator. So even though the shock is inside the frame, this external sag indicator allows you to very quickly eyeball how much rear suspension sag you've got and whether you need to increase or decrease pressure. So the integration on the new Spark frame extends to the front of the bike as well. Scott's actually routed pretty much all of the cables and the rear brake hose through the upper headset bearing. So we have this large diameter headset, specially built spacers as well, and they help to guide the cables through the headset and down into the frame. It does look very neat. It means that the cables can be run quite short, so you have less of them flapping around on the front of the bike. It also means the frame doesn't have to be drilled for cable ports, so that's a little bit easier to manufacture, and also means Scott can reduce the weight of the head tube by not having to reinforce the head tube for those cable ports. However, it does mean that servicing is more involved. If you need to replace that upper headset bearing, you're going to have to remove all of those cables and the brake hose, run them through the headset bearing in order to replace it. So it's worth noting that with this bike, servicing cables and that headset is going to be more labor intensive than a regular bike. I will point out though that although we have this specially designed Syncross headset and stem, it all looks very neat, you can technically run whatever handlebar and stem you want on this bike. You're just not necessarily going to have that neat integration that butts up against the stem here.
Yeah.
Barely put a dent in it.
That's actually a great burger.
Another cool feature of the new Spark is its adjustable geometry. Now, Scott has actually built the Spark with adjustable headset cups. You can actually remove these from the frame, rotate them 180 degrees, and that will steepen or slacken the head tube angle. Now on the Spark 910 test bike we've got here, those headset cups come in the slack position, and combined with the 130mm travel fork, that gives us a very slack 65.8 degree head tube angle. The Spark RC, on the other hand, puts the headset cups in the steep position, and with the shorter 120mm fork, that steepens the head angle to 67.2 degrees. The beauty about this system, compared to using a flip chip, which typically adjusts both the head angle and the seat tube angle, in this case you're really only adjusting the head tube angle. So that means that the trail bike still maintains a nice steep 75.9 degree seat tube angle, and it also means the bottom bracket drop remains at a very healthy 43.5mm, which is very low for a 120mm travel bike. All the numbers are very modern, and it adds up to a bike that's very agile and responsive on the trail, but there is one number that does stick out a little bit on the geometry chart, and that is the seat tube length, which is a little bit longer than some of the Scott Spark's contemporaries. I've had no troubles with this 125mm dropper post on the medium size frame, but it's worth noting that the seat tube length does get quite a bit longer on the large and extra large frames, which could be a problem if you wanted to fit a much longer stroke dropper post. The reason for this long seat tube is purely physical room. The seat post can only go so far in the frame before it gets to the rear shock, so you're a little bit limited with the insertion depth of the seat post.
Of course, we have to talk about the TwinLoc system on the Scott Spark. The TwinLoc has, of course, been a feature of the Spark for many years, and the general purpose of it carries through to this new model. The Spark is built around a proprietary rear shock. It's designed by Scott, but it's manufactured by Fox, and it's called the Nude 5T. Now that shock does have cable activation, and along with the fork, those are linked up to the TwinLoc handlebar remote. And that provides you with 3 different suspension settings. The default position is open, which Scott calls descend, and that gives you a nice plush setting on the fork and the rear shock for descending. The furthest position is a full lockout. That locks out both the fork and the rear shock, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. Where things get interesting though is the middle position, which is called traction control. Now in traction control, the compression damping on the fork is firmed up. As for the rear shock though, that actually has 2 air chambers. In traction control mode, one of those air chambers is closed off and it shrinks the total air volume inside the shock, makes it really progressive, really rampy, so progressive that it actually limits the rear travel from 120 to 80 millimeters. Along with that, it also increases the compression damping to give you a firmer feel for a more efficient pedaling performance. The biggest difference with traction control though is the dynamic geometry. Because the shock sits a lot higher in its travel, that lifts up the bottom bracket and gives you a lot more pedal clearance underneath the cranks. It also steepens the effective seat tube angle, and that puts you in a more powerful climbing position. As a result, with that traction control mode engaged, this bike is an amazing technical climber. On really rough, rocky, rooty trails, you've got plenty of clearance. What it also means is that Scott can build this bike with quite a low bottom bracket, because in that traction control mode, obviously it's higher off the ground, but in descend mode, you're nice and low to the ground, and as a result, really low center of gravity, and it corners like it's on absolute rails. For the new 2022 Scott Spark, Scott has also developed a new TwinLoc remote. Now compared to the old version, this adds a 3rd paddle underneath, which is the dropper post lever. That puts it in a really easy to reach position. It's nice and easy to activate. Above that, you've got the 2 suspension levers. So you use those levers to engage that traction control or that lockout mode, and the top lever to release you back into descend position. Now I have been able to get used to this remote system. Ergonomically, I don't think it's absolutely perfect. You can't adjust the angle of the paddles and they come back quite sharply at you, and as a result, your thumb kind of has to really wrap around that lever before you can push it and engage it. You can adjust the remote left to right, and you can also adjust the angle underneath the brake lever, but I do think there could be some more adjustability here to really dial in those ergonomics.
Oh, they know! Stand back! Oh, I think we're on. We're on! Whoa! Whoa! Look at that! Hey! What a beauty!
And that, folks, wraps up a couple of days of testing at the Buxton Mountain Bike Park as part of the Ride High Country test sessions. We have had an absolute ball riding the fast and flowy single track of Buxton, dashing through the ferns and railing berms. It's been brilliant. We've also had the chance to head up Lake Mountain to ride the Cascade Trail. If you've not done it before, it is a must-do, an epic ride that goes from the top of Lake Mountain all the way down to Marysville. There is some climbing in between though, so don't think it's a downhill run all the way. It is an absolutely fantastic ride. And if you are in the area, you really owe it to yourself to do the Buxton Lake Mountain Double, because you get a really nice variety of riding types and landscapes as well. It's absolutely beautiful and we can highly recommend it. It's been a really good proving ground for a bike like the Scott Spark. Now, speaking of, we've really enjoyed riding this bike. It's certainly absolutely fascinating design, and it's also proven to be quite divisive. We've noticed quite a few comments and questions come through on social media, so I'm going to do my best to answer some of those now and paint you a bit of a picture of what this bike is all about. All right, first question, how's the bottle clearance? Well, on the medium, large and extra large frame sizes, you can fit 2 bottles on the new Scott Spark. On the small frame, however, you can only fit 1. Worth pointing out though that on the medium size that we've been testing here, you are a bit limited with the size of the bottles that you can run if you're running 2. That's due to the length of the seat tube and basically how much clearance there is in there. I've got a 600ml Camelback bottle there and the nose is just rubbing on the top tube, so you won't be able to fit huge size bottles in there. We don't have a large to check, but I do think you'll be able to get a larger size bottle on the seat tube as well. Is it easy to adjust the suspension mid-ride? Yes, it is. There's a hatch underneath the down tube. You don't need any tools to undo that and remove it. Once you've got that hatch away, you can access the Schrader valve to adjust the air pressure in the shock and the rebound adjustment as well. How's the sizing? For me, the size has been great. I'm 175 centimeters tall. We've got a medium frame size here, which is what I ride in every test bike. 440mm reach, not super long, but to be honest, really comfortable, works well with that 60mm stem and the 760mm handlebars. Is the head angle adjustment easy or useful? That's a very good question. It is easy. We have demonstrated how easy it is to loosen the stem, open up the headset cups, rotate them around, and you can steepen the head angle. We haven't done that. We've decided to ride this bike as stock as it comes in the slack position with the 130mm fork, but we do have some plans to hold on to this bike for some long-term testing. We're going to be looking at kind of racifying it a little bit, putting some faster rolling tires, running that headset cup in the steep position, and also fitting a shorter travel fork to tighten up the geometry, effectively turn it into a Spark RC. So make sure you stay tuned to flowmountainbike.com for more on this Scott Spark. All right, what's impressed us most about this bike? For me, I think the TwinLoc system is brilliant. It's not a new technology. Scott has been implementing this design in the Spark, Genius and Ransom for a number of years now, but it still impresses me today the way that that shock volume can be adjusted mid-ride just with the flick of a lever, and you can really change the character of the bike. It means that Scott can build the Spark with a really low bottom bracket, really plush suspension performance in the descend mode, but once you flick it into traction control and that shock volume's reduced and compression is increased, it lifts the whole bike up, gives you loads more pedal clearance, and it turns it into a really good technical climber. And in that regard, it manages to do a lot of things really well. Any downsides? Personally, I'm not a fan of running the cables through the upper headset bearing. This is an emerging trend we've seen from a number of mountain bike companies out there. And on a mountain bike, of course, you do ride in crappy conditions regularly, and headset bearings are a replaceable item. It's not impossible to service, it just means that it's more labor intensive to replace a cable or replace a headset bearing. So me personally, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it does lead to a very clean setup, and I know a lot of people really like the aesthetics of that. Who's this bike for? That's a really good question, because the Spark is available in those two different platforms. You've got the Spark RC and then the trail bike version, the Spark 900 we've got here. I think this is a really nice example of a modern XC bike. It's very fun to ride, it's very capable, it's bordering on being, more of a trail bike, but it does a lot of things really well thanks to that TwinLoc system and the ability to adjust the bike on the fly, adjust the suspension and the geometry effectively. So it climbs very well, but it also descends really well too. I think if you're really serious about racing, you're naturally going to gravitate towards the Spark RC. But if you're going to do the odd race here and there, you're not going to take it too seriously, but more do it for fun, and you're just looking for a fun and versatile XC bike, that's where this Spark 900 really comes into its own. Is it worth upgrading from the old Spark? I think if you've got the current Spark and you're happy with it, it does everything you want it to, I don't think there's enough of a performance advantage to justify selling it and buying one of the new bikes. I think if you've got a bike that's a few years old though, then this kind of represents probably the bleeding edge really of a modern cross-country bike in terms of its adjustability, in terms of its integration, in terms of the suspension performance, the way that you can adjust it on the fly. This is about as modern as it gets. Now, as per usual, the full review of the Scott Spark is now live over at flowmountainbike.com. If you're looking for more info, if you've got any other questions, chances are they'll be answered in the full review. So make sure you click that link in the video description below to check out the review of the Scott Spark 910. If you do have any other questions for us though, by all means, drop them into the comment section below and we'll do our best to answer them for you. As I said before, we'll be holding on to this bike for a longer term test. So we'd love to hear what you would like to to see us test on this bike. If you'd like to see us try out any other components or different setups, make sure you drop your suggestions into the comments below. And also, if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, make sure you do that right now, because we are testing a couple of secret bikes which do compete with the Scott Spark, and I think you're really going to want to find out about those when the reviews launch over the next few weeks. Otherwise, that's it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Scott Spark review from Buxton as part of the Ride High Country test sessions. I hope you get out here and enjoy these trails, and I'll see you next time. Tooroo! Oh, Acheron Ridge.
Is it Acheron?
Or Acheron.
Acheron?
And the seat tube angle is, in this case, we're really only isolating.
We've entered phase 3.
The only way that we could actually catch a fish in a flow video is to come to a trout and salmon farm.
Acheron there.
Acheron?
We just want to make up for the fact that Mick didn't catch any fish while he was up in Rockhampton. So we're here to put that wrong right, you know, and restore faith and respect in the Flow brand by coming to the Buxton Trout and Salmon Farm to do what Mick Ross could not do. Acheron!
65.8. Yes!
Take that, Mick Ross!